Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the live class here. It's morning for me. I'm guessing you all are in different parts of the world. And so welcome. Thanks for joining. So the idea today is we're going to talk about IELTS speaking. I've got a few topics to discuss with you. And I'd also love to answer any questions you have. So feel free anytime to put your questions into the chat box, and I will be watching for those. I'll try to get to as many as I can today, and hopefully this will be something where you can get your questions answered and you'll find it useful for your own preparation. I see a few people out there. I see Pau and Gaurav. Welcome. Hopefully we'll get some others here to join as well. I see Rachel out there also. Hi, Rachel. Yeah, really happy to be here and to talk with you this morning. So one thing we're trying to do here, just a little bit of background about what we're doing today. We would like to introduce more live classes to our Magoosh IELTS students. And so we're trying to think through what kinds of topics would be useful and what kind of format would be useful for everyone as they are, if they're interested in this kind of format for classes. I have a little questionnaire that if you're attending today, it should just take you a couple of minutes. I would really appreciate getting your responses on the questionnaire. So that we can get a better idea of what would be useful for you for these types of sessions. And so I'm gonna put that questionnaire in the comments, and I'll apologize ahead of time. I'm probably going to add that questionnaire in to the comments a few times because the comments kind of scroll up as we go during the session. But if you would take them a minute after the class, sometime today or tomorrow when you think of it, you could fill that out in just a few minutes. It will really help me if you're interested in these kinds of classes. It'll help me to know what kinds of things would be useful. Hi, Sadia. Welcome. I see your comment there. Welcome to the class. Okay, so anyway, that's enough about the questionnaire. I'll plug it again later on. It'll really help me because I'd really like to make these as useful for you as possible. But let's get to the topic of IELTS speaking. Hi, Dina. I saw you just join. Welcome. So let's talk about IELTS speaking. I have been working with some students recently on IELTS, about IELTS speaking, talking to them, listening to them about the things that they are finding most difficult. And I've also been giving some advice to students specifically about the speaking section of the test. I thought I'd start this morning with a couple of things I'm noticing from talking to Magoosh students, that they, some common mistakes that people are making and some easy things that you can fix if you're working on IELTS speaking right now. So let's go through those. I've got a couple of things. Hi, I see Sonia and Russell just joined. Welcome, welcome from Bangladesh and India. People all over the world. It's awesome. Okay, so some important mistakes to avoid when you for IELTS speaking. First of all, answering the wrong question or going off topic is something that I've seen students struggling with a little bit. So this seems kind of obvious, probably, that you shouldn't answer the wrong question. But when you're practicing, when you're going through, if you're a Magoosh student or if you're practicing any other IELTS scripts that you have available to you, make sure you are studying the exact language of the question that has been asked to you. Okay, so for example, I saw recently a student response where the question was, the question was, I'm trying to remember exactly, in your country, when do people give gifts? Okay, that was the question. It was a part 3 question. Okay, so in your country, when do people give gifts? Now you can think about that for yourself. When do people give gifts? The answer that the student gave only mentioned one time. They mentioned the Christmas holiday when people give gifts. Okay, but if you listen to the question carefully, The question is asking you for when in general do people give gifts. Christmas would be one example, but the question was asking for more examples, was asking for multiple examples of times in their country where people give gifts to each other, okay? To get a full score on that question, you would have to answer it precisely, and you would have to mention multiple times that people give gifts. Okay, now the student told me later they didn't really understand when the question was asked that they were supposed to mention multiple instances where people give gifts in their country. Okay, so misunderstandings do happen. But you want to be really careful when you are studying those questions. Go back and review and try to make sure, study the very detailed question, look in a detailed way at the questions to make sure that you have answered them exactly as they have been asked, because your score can be lowered if you go off topic or you answer a slightly different question than what the interview asked you. Okay, so that's a big mistake there. Okay, and for those of you who just joined, right now I'm going through some common mistakes that I've seen recently from students who are practicing for the IELTS speaking test. If you have questions for me, go ahead and put them in the comments box over on the right. I'd love to answer, I'd love to have some back and forth with all of you who are attending here today and answer your questions, okay? All right, the next one. So the next common mistake that I see is that people are not structuring their part 2 and part 3 answers effectively. Okay, so now what I mean by structuring them, you know, compared to your essays, your speaking responses don't need to have a very complicated structure to them. They can be quite simple, but they need to have some structure. You need to let the interviewer know how you're organizing your ideas, okay? So in the example question I just mentioned a moment ago from part 3, if the interviewer asks you something like, okay, when do people give gifts in your country? You should use language to organize your response and let the listener know when you're working your way through the ideas you want to present. So it can be as simple as saying things like, well, the first example I can think of is whatever. Mention a holiday that people give gifts in your country. You should speak about that a little bit, and then you should use that kind of, we call it sort of signposting language to give an indication of the structure of your response. You should use more of that language when you're ready to move to another idea. The second time people give gifts, or another time people give gifts in my country. It's a simple thing, but it can improve your score because it gives more organization and clarity to your responses, okay? I'm going to share if you haven't seen this yet, we have a PDF that is very useful for this. We've got it's a vocabulary PDF that we've created. It's free on our blog for anyone, not just Magoosh students. There are vocabulary ideas throughout the document, but towards the end, there are some ideas for you, especially about phrases and words you can use to organize your responses for the speaking section, and other sort of functions that will be useful as well. So do check that out. You should really master, you should really have a strong grasp of a lot of those kind of organizational structure words, transition words, things like that. They will help you organize your part 2 and part 3 responses so that they're clear. Okay, I see Gaurav asked me a question just a moment ago. Can I note down first the question in part 1 while listening? Because that question seems to be lengthy and difficult to cover everything while speaking about noting it down. Gaurav, do you mean for part 1, you don't take notes during part 1? Are you thinking of part 2 where you take notes? I'm not quite clear on your question. Could you clarify for me in the comments? I'll check that out, because for part 2 you do need to write notes, and so I'm not quite clear exactly what you're asking there. If you're listening there, maybe you could rephrase the question for me. Dina, you had a question. Is there a way to estimate speaking practice on Magoosh site? Not yet, not yet. That's something we're trying to build now. We know that students need and want to get a speaking score, and so we're trying to figure that out. What we do have is a resource for you. If you look up in the resources, if you're a Magoosh student, you can see in the resources tab that's at the top bar on the site. You can see that there is a guide to help you self-score, and that's all we can offer right now. But we are working on it, Dina. We are trying to build in speaking grading, like we have writing grading for students right now. Okay, Gaurav, I'm not quite clear. So in part one, you want to know, can I note down first the question of part one while listening? So no, during part one of the speaking test, you should not. Oh, are you asking about the listening test, Gaurav? I think Gaurav might be talking about the listening part. I'll wait for him to respond. We can talk about listening a bit later. If you're talking about the listening, Gaurav, then we can talk about that towards the end of the session. I'm going to continue on here with some speaking. Gaurav, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. So for part one, no, you should not take notes on the speaking test. You should not take notes for the IELTS speaking test. Okay, so during IELTS, you're with an interviewer, and you're supposed to answer the questions like a conversation. Okay, so you do not take notes for IELTS speaking during the interview, except during part two, there is an opportunity to take notes for 1 minute before you give a response. Okay, so no, for part one and part three, no notes. Okay, you should have more of a conversation with your interviewer. Okay, I see some more people joined. Welcome to everybody. Okay, Gaurav, sorry about the trouble I had understanding your question. So the next one. For those of you who just joined, we are going through some common mistakes that I've seen recently from students who are preparing for the IELTS test. So we're going through each one of those. If you just joined, you missed some stuff. We are going to post the recording to this session for everybody. We'll send you an email later today or tomorrow. You get that in your inbox, and so you can see the whole thing. It'll be on YouTube for you. Okay, the next big mistake that I'm seeing from students recently, this is a big one, and this can really help your score improve. That students, especially in part one, but also in part three, I think, of the test, they are not giving enough detail. They're not saying enough to get the best score that they possibly could. Okay, so during part one of the test, your answers can be short, okay, but they should not be just one sentence. If the interviewer asks you something like, describe a place you liked to go in your hometown when you were growing up, okay, you should not just say, well, I liked to go to the swimming pool, okay? But I'm seeing some students answer with the really short answers like that, one sentence. You should always, even in part one, you should always say more if you can. Now, you don't want to go off topic. You don't, like we talked about at the beginning of the session, you don't want to go the wrong way and start answering a question that they didn't ask you. But you should always give an answer and then explain what you mean. And if you can, give some details, give some examples, okay, to describe what you're saying, if that's relevant to the question. So in my question, describe a place where you enjoyed going when you were a child. Okay, so I might say, okay, I loved going to the swimming pool. I used to go there with my family, and we always had so much fun. You know, we could stay in the pool for hours and hours and hours and not get tired. Okay. Just that little extra detail gives your responses, gives your interviewer more of an idea about how strong your language is. And you want to show off all the language you know, especially in part one, where the questions are a little bit easier to answer. So you should do that. As you're answering, questions for, especially for practices for part one. Practice just giving a basic sentence answer and then just add a little detail. Add a little bit that's relevant to the question that was asked to you. And that's going to help you to show off your vocabulary. It can allow you to give more, to show off more grammatical structures, and that can help your grammar score. But it also helps you with your coherence so that the interviewer fully understands your questions and answers and believes that you've answered them fully. Okay, so that can be a simple thing you do to add to your answers that can really have an impact on your score. Okay, so adding detail, examples where they are relevant. Practice this. Okay. Okay. Next one. So a final thing, and this is, I think, really natural and normal, but I'm noticing that many students don't give themselves enough time to think and to answer in a way that really shows off their language. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is that understandably, many people feel nervous during the speaking test. You feel rushed. You feel like you need to speak quickly and to show off how fluent you are, okay? And so what I'm noticing when I'm watching students answering IELTS questions is that they're rushing. And sometimes when you rush, as I'm sure you're familiar with, you don't think as clearly as you could otherwise when you're more relaxed and just speaking in a normal sort of way, like you would with somebody you're familiar with, a friend, a family member, whatever. And so you want to practice trying to slow down when you are practicing IELTS speaking questions and giving yourself time to think. It is not going to hurt you badly if the interviewer asks you a question and you take a second or two. Just give yourself 2 seconds to take a breath and think about what you want to say. Some of the questions are hard. Part 3 questions are they're hard to answer, even if you have the language. Even in your own language, you might have to take a moment to think. IELTS interviewers know that, and it's okay. You can take a second or two. Now, you don't want to take 5 seconds. You don't want to take 10. Then they're going to think you don't have the language to answer the question. But slow down. Take some time to think, and also master some of the phrases that buy you time if you need them. Okay, so it is perfectly fine to say things like, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that one before. Okay, in the time it takes you to say that sentence, you can think of things that you can respond with. Okay, so don't get in a rush. Try to not get flustered. Flustered means frustrated, or when you're starting to feel like the tension or pressure is rising and you start making mistakes. Right, that's what being flustered is. And try to avoid that as you practice, and just slow down, take deep breaths, take your time in between questions, and really think about what you want to say for each answer. Okay, a question came in. I speak fast naturally. Why? When I try to speak slow, I feel like I'm searching from memory. Okay, if you speak fast naturally, that you should do what feels natural. Of course, that is okay. If you are speaking quickly and you're making a lot of mistakes, or you're repeating yourself, that's another thing that I see from students who like to speak quickly. They want to keep talking rapidly, and they say things multiple times in their response. Pay attention to that. You should be recording yourself as you respond to IELTS questions. And if you notice a lot of repetition, or that you are really struggling to pronounce or think about words that what that happens when you're in the middle of a sentence and you can't quite think of the word that you want to say exactly. If you're noticing that thing happening a lot, then consider trying to slow down. But if you are speaking quickly and fluently and it's not causing you problems, then by all means, you should just go with what's natural to you. That is perfectly fine. Okay, what I'm noticing is when students feel that they need to speak really fast to get a high fluency score, but fluency actually isn't connected with speed necessarily. It kind of is. You don't want to have pauses, and you don't want to have moments where it's clear that you've lost the words, you don't know exactly what you should say, and you don't know, you don't have the language to say what you want to say. That can bring down your score. But a regular rate of speed where you speak, where the ideas flow out, and you're not pausing and stopping and stuttering and stopping all the time, that is fluent also. And it doesn't have to be really, really fast speaking to be fluent in that way. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference. Definitely, though, go with what's working for you. If it's causing you problems to slow down, then don't. Okay, then that's a problem for you specifically. Okay, any other questions right now? I'm about to switch topics just a little bit. I have some more resources I want to share for everybody here. But if there are questions right now, I'd be happy to take them. Oh, also, for those of you who just joined, while I'm waiting for questions to come in, I talked about this at the beginning of the session, and I'm going to say it again. We want to do more of these sort of live events, and we're doing it today on YouTube. Maybe next time we'll find a different platform to do it. We'll see. We're experimenting with things a little bit. But I want to talk about things that are useful for all of you, and I want to know what kinds of things you would find most useful for these kinds of live sessions if we continue adding them. So I've got a little short survey. It would really, really help me if you would fill that out. Okay, I put it just now in the comments. If you would take a moment after the session today just to fill out and give me ideas, I would really love it, because I want to make these as useful for all of you as possible. Okay, I've got another question that came in here before we move on to another topic. You advise on asking for clarification on words during the speaking section. Another resource says the opposite. Does asking for clarity lower your score or make your vocab seem insufficient? Great question. That is a fantastic question. So you do not want to ask for clarification often, okay? And it is best if you don't ask for clarification in parts 1 and 2, okay? In part 1 of the test, it is okay, and it will not lower your score if you just ask the interviewer, say, oh, I didn't catch that, or I didn't catch what you said. Could you repeat that again? And they can repeat the question. Part 1 questions are supposed to be simple, simpler at least than part 3. So you don't want to ask for clarity in part 1, because that seems like, well, the vocabulary isn't as hard. It might be a sign to the interviewer that your language isn't very strong. So you want to avoid that, yes, okay. And in part 2, the question is written out for you. And part 2 language also tends to be not extremely complicated. So it's expected that you will not ask for clarification on part 2. You should not take that question card that they give you. You should not say, I don't understand this part. Could you clarify this? That would not be good. And yes, that would probably lower your score a bit. But especially for part 3, where the questions are more complicated, it is not going to hurt your score if if there's a question where you weren't quite sure you understood it, you're not confident that you can answer it directly because you didn't. Maybe there is a word or something in there that you didn't quite get. It's okay to ask for clarity. You can say, oh, I didn't quite catch that. Could you rephrase that question for me? And they'll do it, and it's not going to hurt you. You don't want to do it often, though. Not more than once, okay? And hopefully you don't have to do it at all. It's not. So you can tell from how I'm answering. It's not a great thing. You don't want to have to to rephrase a question, but I'll tell you, it will hurt your score worse, much more, if you answer the wrong question, or if you can't answer because you didn't know what the person said. Okay, so save it for that time, okay, when you really need to ask for clarification. And don't hesitate to do it. That it will not bring down, especially if you then provide a really great response to the rephrased question, that is going to be great. And that is going to help your score the most. Okay. So yes, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. My advice is definitely don't do it often, and don't do it as a strategy that you plan to do it to give yourself a lot of time. That's not the best use of asking for clarification. Okay, there are other phrases you can use to ask for clarification. Okay, all right, good. Let's move on to some other things. I've got some other resources I want to share with all of you here before we go. I'm planning to be on for another 20 minutes or so. So we've got plenty of time for more questions if you have them. All right. So another thing students are asking me about recently is, many of you I know out there are studying on your own and you don't have a conversation partner. If you can get any kind of conversation partner, even if that conversation partner is not a native English speaker, I highly recommend that. If there's somebody that whose English skills are like yours, or hopefully, a little bit better than yours so that you can learn something from them, even that is extremely good practice. Just to be able to use your English regularly, even if it's not with a native speaker, that is going to help your fluency. It's going to help your ability to answer the different types of questions. And I'm going to recommend, in a moment, I'm going to recommend some specific ways that I'd recommend that you practice with a partner if you can find one, okay? But I'm noticing a lot of students out there, even students who live, I'm in the United States. I've been talking to students recently who are in the United Kingdom, Canada, other places where there are unlimited number of native English speakers around them. There's still issues that are preventing them from getting a lot of practice speaking English. Okay, so let's talk about that just a little bit. What can you do if this is a concern for you? All right, so the first thing you should be doing, even if you don't have any partner, there's nobody in your life, even a non-native speakers, friends or family members, nobody around you is speaking English regularly or wants to speak English with you, you should still be speaking to yourself. I mean, in your room at home or wherever. I know it might feel kind of embarrassing, but you should be every day, like exercise. Do you go on a walk every day, or do you do something to move your body every day? You should be doing something to move your linguistic skills every day, your ability to speak in English fluently, and to take all those words, the vocabulary you've got in the back of your mind, to make it active and to be able to use it in conversation. Speaking with other people is the best way to activate those kinds of things. But if you don't have that, you can still do a lot of good for yourself if you're practicing on your own. Now, I've got a little resource here. This is shared in other places in the Magoosh product, so maybe you've seen this already. But we've compiled a list of speaking topics, and I just shared that link to our blog to the PDF in the comments there. You should be going through and, like exercise, answering a couple of these kinds of questions in here regularly. Okay, now they're mostly good for part 1 of the test. We've also got some part 2 ones in there, but you should go through and spend not a long time, 10 or 15 minutes, answering those questions out loud to yourself every day. A couple of them, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Just a couple of minutes every day will improve your fluency and will help you prepare. When you come across a question that you answer and you're not quite sure, you don't quite have the English to answer it the way you want to, the way you could in your native language, that's an opportunity. Go, take note of that, and try to figure out the vocabulary you need in order to say the thing that you wanted to say. That's a good study opportunity for you. So you plan to spend 10 minutes answering questions. Maybe you can record yourself and then spend another 10 minutes afterwards trying to fill in the language gaps that you noticed when you were speaking. If you do that every day for a month, for 2 months, I don't know how long you have to study, you will notice improvements, especially for part one there. I see some questions coming in. I'm going to get to them in just a moment. I have one more resource to share that's related to what I just said. I'm going to share a resource I love for part 3 of the speaking test. This is from the New York Times. I just put the link there. The New York Times is, if you're not familiar, is one of the major newspapers in the United States. And they put together some educational resources that they release for free for folks on their website. And this one I linked to is actually linked to writing prompts. You're going to see writing prompts at the top. But this is a fabulous resource for IELTS students who are studying for part 3 questions on the speaking test. The reason it's so great is that, as you know, part 3 questions cover a lot of different kinds of topics that probably you don't spend a lot of time speaking about and using your English to discuss, right? Unless you are frequently talking about news and current events, the environment, transportation, education. These kinds of topics are not common ones. You don't, you might be really great at small talk conversations, saying hello to people, talking about your family, things that you've learned in English for years and years and years. But part 3 of the test measures your ability to discuss these other types of topics, things that are going to come up in academic settings or in more advanced other settings where you're going to need more vocabulary and more advanced vocabulary and grammar to discuss effectively. This New York Times site has questions that you can answer. And you could use them for writing practice, but I like them as speaking practice. And what I really love about them is that each one has a kind of resource for you, a newspaper article. Sometimes they're just images, or somebody had written an essay on a topic, and you can read those things. You can use them to develop your own vocabulary. You can study those things to get ideas about what you might say and how you could respond. And then you can practice answering the questions that they put there for you out loud, okay? And that is fabulous practice for part 3. I really highly recommend that you do, I shared that other PDF a moment ago. Maybe you do a couple of part 1 questions regularly, and then you work on trying to answer some of these questions that they put out for you on the New York Times site. In addition to the very specific IELTS practice that you're doing on Magoosh or other resources that you have, official resources, this would be a great thing to work on, especially to improve your vocabulary. Okay. Let me see. I've got some questions. I want to take a look at some of your questions here. One moment. Will I get a low score if I speak for less than 2 minutes on part 2? No. You should speak for 1 to 2 minutes. The interviewer is going to stop you if you go above 2 minutes. So that's really the upper limit for what you should be practicing for. 2 minutes. You don't need to get to 2 minutes. My advice is to shoot for, as you're practicing, shoot for something like 1 minute and 30 seconds, 1 minute and 45 seconds, okay? That's the amount of time it typically takes to effectively go through those bullet points on the question card. So you're answering each one of those as, you've studied, I'm sure. You're supposed to answer those quickly, and in a sentence or two, you quickly work through those. And then to give a lengthy response to that last question or statement at the bottom of the card, something where you have 1, 2, or even 3 points to say about it. It's really hard to do that and provide a complete answer in less than about 1.5 minutes, okay? But technically, your answer only needs to be from 1 to 2 minutes. And like we were talking about earlier in the session, some people speak faster than others. So they can say more in a minute than someone else can. And in theory, it's possible to score really, really well and just score and just provide a response that's like a minute or just over a minute. It is theoretically possible for somebody to do that. Okay, so think of, as you're preparing, think about the time. You definitely don't want to be under a minute, but more so, think about how completely you're answering, especially that last question on the card that they give you. So you should say, the first reason is whatever. You provide a sentence, you explain it, maybe you provide a detail, and then you should have another point. Almost always, you should have at least 2 points that you're making about that last point on the topic card, and you should treat that equally. You should have as much to say about that. If you do that for that last part of the topic card, your answer, if it's a complete answer there with detail and that you've explained, you're going to be over. You're going to be over the 1 minute for sure. Okay. So pay attention to how completely you're answering, not only the time that you're spending on it. All right, another question here. I see a question about writing. Dina, you're asking about how many essays you can estimate through Magoosh. So students who sign up for our let's see. I haven't looked at our offerings recently. We offer for our 6-month subscription. We offer 4 essays. Okay, so there are 4 essays graded there, and so. If you want to get that number of essays graded with your subscription, the 6-month plan is what you want. Okay, I think we're right now for the shorter subscriptions we offer 1 essay. I have to look again. It's been a little while since I've looked at the exact offering that we have right now. Okay. Let's see. So next question here. How can you effectively practice listening? Let me get to that question. I've got time. I'm going to have time at the end. So if you hang on, I'm going to talk. I can talk about listening at the end here. I just want to wrap up the discussion about speaking quickly, and then we'll get to listening. Okay. So will you be penalized? Will you be penalized for having an incomplete answer in part 2? So the time is running out. Oh, great question. So this relates to what we were just talking about a moment ago. Let's see, the answer to that question is complicated. If you have not spoken in depth if you have not provided at least one in-depth response to that last question on the topic card. So you've provided an answer and you've started explaining what you mean by it and hopefully providing a detail. If you have not gotten all the way through at least one of those points that you're going to make, then yes, I could see that impacting your score because you did not provide a complete answer to that question. Ideally, you will have 2 points to make, as I was just talking about. And if you do a really great job on the first one and you're making your way through the second one and you're not struggling, you have a lot to say, and it's clear that if you just had 30 more seconds, you could keep talking about that thing maybe for the rest of the day. It's not a struggle for you. Then no, that's not going to hurt your score dramatically. Okay. You do want to practice providing complete answers though, and getting a sense of the timing of part 2 so that you can try your best to fit in those 2 complete points at the end of your discussion to the best of your ability. Okay, because it does help for clarity, just to say the idea that you have on your mind. If you leave an idea out there that's important to your response and it wasn't quite clear to the examiner what you were trying to say, that you could use more explanation, then the examiner might say, okay, well, I'm not quite sure where this person was going and what they were trying to say. So it's a mixed answer. I hope that answer isn't confusing. I think if you're going through part 2 just to summarize a little bit, and you're not struggling, you're able to say what you want to say, and you provided at least one really clear point with details and examples, and you're moving on to the second one, and you've started into that, and it's clear you could talk longer, and they cut you off, I wouldn't worry about that too much. If you're really struggling and your answers are not so clear, and you're not able to even get out one complete point that you're trying to make, or if you're struggling to make that second one and then they cut you off, that's going to be a problem, but it's more related to your ability to provide a coherent answer and less just strictly about the timing of cutting you off. Okay, so practice the timing. Try to get your answers in there. That's a good thing to practice. But don't on an exam day, if that happens to you, don't sweat it too much, especially if you weren't struggling to say a lot about the topic that they've provided. Okay, right. Next one, our practice questions. I don't want to skip anybody. Okay, our practice questions of speaking section on Magoosh page, the same difficulty level as the real IELTS exam. Yeah, we've really worked to try to get the difficulty level the same. It's a little tough for us right now because, as you know, the IELTS is an interview, and there are some times when being in an interview makes practice easier and sometimes harder than what we have on our site currently at Magoosh. So, you know, when you're with an interviewer, you're feeling nervous in a way that you probably don't when you are practicing with Magoosh. And so that's a difference. And so, like a few minutes ago, I mentioned having a speaking partner. One good thing to do to practice the IELTS speaking questions, even the Magoosh questions, you know, after you answer the last question, or if you want to go through question by question during the practice, if you want to have somebody, a partner, a family member, a friend, reading you those questions like it's an actual exam and trying to replicate the experience of trying to have some pressure to answer the questions, that can be really beneficial and I do recommend that kind of practice. The questions themselves, part 1, part 2, part 3 questions, yes, I am very confident they are at the same level. You know, I've seen official tests, some of which I think are harder and easier than others. There is a range, and part of that difficulty, quite frankly, is just whether or not you're familiar with the questions or the topics. I saw one recently where there were a lot of questions in part 3 about sports. And some people don't watch sports or don't care about sports very much. And so if you get questions about sports, you know, and you don't have a lot to say about sports, that makes it harder for you, okay, right? And if you have a lot to say about sports, it makes it easier. That kind of thing can happen, and the answer for that is to simply make sure that you are studying a lot of different types of topics. Like we talked about a moment ago, that New York Times website I shared for practice. That gives you different topic areas where you can read and then think about vocabulary and then practice speaking about those things. That is one major way that one test is going to feel harder than the other to you, and the best way to practice for that is to really focus on areas that are not common for you, that are not things that you normally talk about. The typical topics on the IELTS, just so, you know, it's not like anything and everything exists on the IELTS. I'm sure you're aware. You know, the major topic areas are tourism and travel, education, transportation. They often have a lot of questions about transportation. Talking about family, especially for part 1, that's a big one, as I'm sure you're aware. Sports is a topic they talk about. It's a common one. It's a general one. So you should be trying to think about and read about sports, practice talking about sports, even if you don't like sports at all. They talk about things like in the news, like crimes and, you know, controversial issues like how, you know, punishment and things like that. You know, I saw some questions recently about what's fair in terms of jail time that people should spend for things. A very unusual topic to think about, something you don't probably talk about quite a bit. Lots of questions about the internet and technology, and about advertising, retail, commercials, things like that. Okay, so those are the kinds of topic areas that you should be seeking out and trying to talk about. Okay, we just have a couple of minutes here. So there was a question. Okay, so we have two questions that are not related to speaking. Perfect. Let's finish up with those two questions. And then before you leave, please, I've said this several times, but for those of you who are here, if you haven't filled out the survey yet, there's a survey that I've put out. If you just joined a moment ago, I'm going to add this back in here. This will help me to know what kinds of topics and how useful you find these sort of live sessions, what kinds of topics you'd love to hear about in the future. So if you haven't done it yet, please, please, please fill it out. That's my one. That's the one thing I'm asking for here today, is for everybody, if you please do that, it will help me a lot. Okay, so two questions that are not speaking related. There's one last one. One question here about how to stop saying a lot during speaking. Okay, that is important. Try to catch yourself doing that. And first of all, record yourself. Listen to yourself and notice it's not just often there are other phrases or other things that people say that they use to fill in time. And you have to notice it and practice not doing it, okay? And the best thing to do as you practice, at least at first, is to slow down and not say anything. Practice just trying to be silent. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel like you're silent forever. But actually, it's probably less noticeable for people listening to you than it is to you yourself, okay? And so practice slowing down, trying to cut out that thing that you say just out of habit when maybe you're nervous or maybe you're not sure what to say. And the first step is to just say nothing. Try to do that and think about it as you're answering questions. And then, hopefully you'll be able to fill some of that space with some of these phrases that you are going to learn if you're studying that PDF that I shared earlier in the comments. That can be one way to avoid pauses that are too long. And otherwise, just getting disciplined about slowing down and just trying not to say those things that you're doing out of habit. It takes practice. It's just like practicing an instrument or practicing for a sport or whatever. You have to train your brain to do these things, or to train them not to do certain things over time and with practice. Okay. One more speaking question, then we'll get to the non-speaking questions immediately after this. So, do I always need to speak the truth, or can I improvise? I may have a lot of vocabulary, but what I'm saying is not true. Do it. Yes, do it. Improvise. Be creative. Practice being creative when you're practicing for IELTS speaking. What you say should not seem unrealistic, or that it's kind of, hard to believe. Okay, you should not say things that are the word would be implausible. Okay, that the interviewer is like, well, I don't know, that's a strange thing that person said. But otherwise, they are not going to check the facts of what you say. And if you have an idea about how to answer a question, even if it's not true, then absolutely just do it. Just do that. That is what they are testing you on, is your language. And if you have an answer that comes to mind that you know how to say, and it is not true about you, maybe it's true about somebody you know, or maybe you just completely made it up. Yes, 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 do that. That is not a problem. Now, I will say that I think it is easier to talk about the truth, right? So you can think of real examples when it's your actual opinion, or when it actually happened to you. It's easier to think about things often and to provide details from real experience. But there are times when you should absolutely just say what comes to mind and make it sound realistic for you, and that's great. Okay, now I want to get to these non-speaking questions because I promised the folks that I'd answer those. And I see some questions coming in. I've got time here this morning, so I'm going to stay on for a while longer here and just answer your questions while we're here. Okay, so a question from earlier was, how do you, oh boy, I have to go back. Okay, how do you practice effectively for the listening test? So the student wants to know about listening practice. Well, so if you're a Magoosh student, going through all the questions helps. With going through those exact style of recordings is going to help you prepare. But if listening is hard for you in general, then I recommend, so if this is your focus area and you need to work on listening because it's weak for you, then you need to build in daily practice and daily opportunities to be listening to English that is similar to what you're going to hear on the IELTS exam. So you should go outside of just IELTS practice and go into other things. So some places you can study on your own that I recommend. So I'm sure you're aware of things like TED Talks. Okay, that is a fantastic place to get difficult IELTS-like language, and you can also find topics that are interesting to you. Okay, so they've got thousands of TED Talks for free online that you can go to, and maybe once a day you spend 15 minutes listening to a new TED Talk and doing your best to understand it. I believe many of them have transcripts that you can read as well. So if you didn't catch language, you can go back, and after you've listened to it, you can go back and read it. Now, I don't recommend reading and listening at the same time. That's a different skill. Actually, that's reading. That's just reading. That's not listening. That is where you're practicing reading, which is also useful. But to get the listening practice you need, you should listen to things first and then go back and check your understanding by reading them and spending time with the vocabulary you didn't understand. Okay, so start there. And there are, even if you're just going to YouTube or wherever you can access native speakers talking, you should build that into your daily routine. Maybe if you commute to work on the bus, you can put some headphones in. You can say, my commute to work, I'm going to listen for 15 minutes every day to some English, and then I'm going to learn 5 new vocabulary words from what I listen to. Even just that regular practice and the repetition can be extremely valuable and useful. Okay. All right. So I'm going now to the questions towards the end. So let me see. I don't want to miss anybody's questions. Could you tell us what grammar structures to use for 9 or 8 band in writing? Okay, good question. So what grammar structures are going to give you a great score? Okay, the answer to this is that, first of all, there's no specific grammar structures that are automatically, if you do them, going to give you an 8 or 9. What's going to give you an 8 or 9 in grammar is your ability to use a wide variety of structures in your writing and to use them accurately without mistakes and effectively to communicate your ideas. Okay? So rather than focusing on just a few magic structures, you should be focusing on, as you're looking at your writing responses, your practice responses, are you using the same sentence patterns repeatedly? And if so, you should be trying to mix them up. For example, how many sentences that you write begin with something like a transition word and then just a simple sentence, right? You might say something like however or nevertheless, comma, and then you continue. If you've got a lot of sentences with that pattern in your writing, you should try to mix them up. how many sentences are just simple sentences? They are not complex or compound. Okay, so are you using sentences that are joined with a conjunction in the middle? Okay, so you say a sentence, a clause, and then maybe a comma, and then a but, and then you add another complete clause. That could be a compound sentence that you write. Or using subordination, things like adjective clauses or adverb clauses. I'm using grammar words here. If you're not familiar with those, what I'm talking about, look those things up. Adjective clauses, adverb clauses, okay? Noun clauses. Are you using passive voice, okay? Are you beginning some sentences with things like, while I do like to spend time outside, comma, I don't like spending much time outside in the winter because it's too cold. Okay, so those types of sentences where you're using complicated patterns, they should appear in your essay, but you don't want to have too much of one thing. The high score comes from variety of sentence structures and your ability to use them accurately and to convey the meaning that you want. Okay, so I guess to give you a satisfying answer, if you're not very skilled or good yet at using structures like I mentioned just a moment ago, adjective clauses, noun clauses, adverb clauses, more complicated verb tenses like the perfect tenses, right? Present perfect, past perfect, okay? If you're not skilled at using passive voice and structures like that, do practice those. Those are good ones to incorporate in your writing, okay? But just as you're editing your own work, make sure you have a variety of structures, okay? And that will help you the most, okay? Okay, just a couple more questions, then we're going to sign off for today. Malik, I see your question here. How do you think about what will be my next sentence during the speaking part 2? I mean, how would I let's see. I'm not certain that I understand your answer or your question fully. Okay, so I think but that's a strategy I highly recommend, because then you can use your full 1 minute to organize an answer for the last prompt on the page. And that is the one that requires more length from you. Use your entire minute to think of hopefully at least 2 points that you want to make about that last prompt. And that will help you so that when you're in the middle of your response for the first point that you want to make, that you can remember what you wanted to say for that point number 2. Okay, so practice using your minute to organize a very simple outline with the point you want to make, or the points, hopefully 2 points to that last question that they ask. If you have a third point, you could put it there, although most people don't have time to talk completely about 3 points in their responses. And then that will serve as a reminder about what you want to say. I hope that answers your question. I'm not certain it did, but I'm not certain also that I understood your question completely. I see a question here from English with John. I got 6 in IELTS exam last month. When I got my results, I understood that I have to improve my general English. What things could you give advice for improving my general English from all sections? Great question. Yeah, this is an important question, because, the IELTS exam does measure your English skills, and there are tips ways you can learn about the exam that are going to improve your score for sure. That's what we're talking about mostly here today. So strategies and how to practice effectively. But ultimately, your underlying English skills are critical, and are, if you need to improve your English, there's almost no way around getting a really high score if your English skills are not quite there yet. Okay, so it's a great question. There's a blog resource that we have with language development advice for students who have a longer time to study, especially for students who do not have a teacher or they're not going to a class regularly. I mean, if you can sign up for a class, high quality class for English, speaking, for writing, that's the best. You can get that in-person instruction. That's often the best thing. But if you don't have that option, then I've got a resource here. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to look up on my screen here. And I want to share it here in the comments for you, because I think this, I wrote up a resource a few years ago for this exact question that you just asked. So here we go. I'm going to share this here. Okay, it's called Learn Grammar in 10 Weeks, but actually it covers all 4 skills. This is a structured plan with some advice over a period of time. So hopefully you have longer than 10 weeks. Maybe you've got a few months you're looking at to try to make improvements to your English skill. And these are self-study exercises that you can go through to help you improve in all areas of the test, your English skills. Okay, as I said a moment ago, the best thing is if you can get signed up for an English class, that is number one. But if you don't have that option, then these are some recommended activities that you can do on your own to try to improve your English skills. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that is the end of the questions here today. We've gone for almost exactly an hour. I really want to thank everybody for attending here today. And as I've mentioned several times, we really want to do more of these events so that we can answer questions live and give students an opportunity to ask their questions. And, I really want to know what you would find useful. I believe many of you are Magoosh students out there. You can ask questions about how to practice in Magoosh, what kinds of things you would like more help with after practicing with our materials. If you're not a Magoosh student, we also want to hear from you about what you would find useful. And so please do, I've said this several times, but I don't know who has joined and who wasn't along for the entire webinar here today. But if you have a moment, you can fill out that survey I just added to the comments, and I'd really, really, really appreciate it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I see some notes coming in, and some thanks. I thank you for your great questions. And I see some more coming in. There's some additional questions here. All right. Well, I don't have any meetings for a little bit here. Let's just go through while you're here. I want to make this useful for everybody who's joined. Okay. So question. So I'm scoring low in either reading or writing. Can you help me? What aspects do I need to focus on, especially for writing in general? Yeah. Reading and writing are very different things. So the number one thing everybody can do to study for IELTS is to study vocabulary. Okay, so if you are not studying vocabulary regularly, start doing that today. Okay, you should be, as you're preparing for the IELTS exam, it doesn't matter to me if your test is a few weeks away or if it is a year from now, you should be studying a few words every day. 10 to 15 words would be great. And more than that tends to be too much. And don't spend a long time studying vocabulary. You want to spend a few minutes a day. So you should have a list of words that you are finding in your Magoosh practice, in your IELTS practice generally, anywhere, from reading you're doing online, from YouTube videos you're watching, whatever. You should be collecting words and creating a list for yourself on your phone, maybe a book. When I study vocabulary, I like to keep a book, just pencil and paper. It just helps me to have something physical. And I've got a small book that I can carry it around in my pocket if I need to. And I can return to it. Like in those moments, I've got a doctor's visit later this week. And I can pull out my book as I'm waiting for the doctor to call me in, and I can read over my word list. You want to be spending 15 minutes, 20 minutes, not more than that. You don't want to spend an hour. You want to spend a short amount of time each day learning brand new words and reviewing words that you picked up from previous days. Okay, when you've really mastered a word, you can cross it off maybe. Vocabulary is my number one area of development for reading and writing for all aspects of the test. Okay, so that would be my place for you to start in general. I think the IELTS is largely a test of vocabulary, your ability to paraphrase and to recognize paraphrases on the reading section. It's mostly vocabulary. Your ability to write at length, to speak at length about these topics that they provide you. Very often, students struggle because they don't have the words to say or write what they want to communicate. Okay, so start there. If you're not studying vocabulary regularly, start there. Okay. Okay, just no more questions, just thanks from folks. Thank you all. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Check your inbox. We will advertise the next session for folks. And I'd love to see everybody there next time. Okay, so I'm going to sign off. Bye, everybody. Thank you.